Hello, and welcome to week one of Introduction to Sociology. Today, we're going to be studying the sociological perspective and research process. So, basically, we're going to be getting into what is sociology, what is society, and how do we study it. Sociology is the study of society and human interactions. Okay, so basically, I think about sociology as studying groups of people with something in common, some kind of a common bond, something that holds them together. Whether it's nation of origin, whether it's, share love of a same football team. Okay, any group of people can be arguably a society. Generally, think of a society as something bigger than a group, okay? But again, what is a group but just a small microcosm, a small society, okay? So again, sociology is the study of society, okay? And then all things human. Hence the idea of group interaction, because that's really what it is. Society, then, is a group of people with something in common, okay, such as nation of origin, common culture, okay, it can be any of these things. So, again, we are in sociology, we are studying society, and society is a group of people with something in common, okay? The sociological perspective, again, as I kind of talked about in my welcome video, when you start to look at society through the lens of sociology, you're looking at these macro variables such as culture. How does culture affect your life? Well, think about it. How does culture affect the food you eat, the type of language you speak, the acceptable, appropriate social norms, for example, how you interact in relationships, attitudes toward gender and race and religion? All of these factors, okay? So culture structures your life, but it doesn't just structure one person's life, it tends to structure groups of people's life. For example, do Americans share a common culture? Do we all kind of share a common way of life? Is the same kind of way of life similar in England? Can someone from America go to England and get along pretty well? But then, if someone from America goes to a different country that has a different kind of culture with a different kind of language, maybe that American experiences something like culture shock. How does race affect our life? How does race affect our access, the opportunities to materials, to goods, to be able to rise up the social class ladder? How does the neighborhood you grew up in associated with your intelligence quotient, your score on an IQ test? And that one gets me every time because there is a direct association between the type of school you went to, the neighborhood you lived in, and your overall ability to score well on an intelligence test. And that's where the idea is society is not always fair. Inequality exists. Some people have better chances. And when you look at things like race was constructed so that Europeans could subjugate an entire group of people into the lower class. That's the sociological perspective, okay? How does sex affect your life? Not like sexuality, but like biological sex. And we'll get to sexuality because that too. But how does biological sex affect your life? How does identifying as male or female or intersex structure the way you think, the way you behave, the clothes you dress, the way you talk? Okay? This is the cool stuff we're going to talk about in this class. Okay? So the sociological perspective is seeing society through the lens of sociology, looking at groups of people and saying, what's going on? How are they interacting? How are they building a society? And so that's what we're looking at. We're going to be looking at the relationship between individuals and social forces. Are you in college right now because you want to be in college, or are you in college because of economic factors, social forces? How much does the economy driving your decisions to go to college and what job you want to take? Think about it. In America, in a capitalist society, only 2 out of 100 people are going to become farmers. 80% of the jobs are white collar jobs. What's the best way to get a white collar job? One method is to get an education, to get that job prestige, to get that wealth, to have some power over your own lives and potentially other people if that's something you aspire for. Okay, so again, how does race, socioeconomic status or social class, sex and gender, how does sexuality, identifying as heterosexual or homosexual or somewhere along the continuum of sexuality, how does that affect your life? Does identifying as gay increase the likelihood that you will experience prejudice and discrimination? Does identifying as black increase the, and so depressing, how much prejudice and discrimination you might experience? Okay, and then how does prejudice and discrimination affect things like stress, which then affects the body because it lowers your immune system? So, are some diseases associated with race actually because of biological race, or are they because of stress induced from prejudice and discrimination? Powerful biopsychosocial questions, okay? How does the education system affect your life? What school did you go to? Do they have advanced placement classes? Were you taught the information you need to score well on an ACT and an SAT to get into a really good school, to get into a really good job? Okay? And then how does the historical context affect our life? I mean, think about women, for example, in modern times in the United States. It took 3 waves of feminism just to get to the point where a woman makes 80 cents on the dollar. However, that's not even accurate because a Hispanic woman makes 60 cents to every man's dollar, a black woman makes 67 cents to every man's dollar, a white woman makes 80 cents to every man's dollar, and an Asian woman makes 86 cents to every man's dollar. Again, why does a woman make less than a man, and why do different women of different races make differential amounts? And that's the association between race, sex, and social class. Okay, that's 3 variables combined into one beautiful picture of sadness and oppression of how women have been subjugated into the lower classes themselves for 10,000s of years. Okay, so all this stuff we're going to talk about in this class. Okay, where does sociology come from? You definitely have the old philosophy. Okay, what's going on with the world? How does it work? How does society work? How is it structured? What's up with government? What's up with bureaucracy? Okay, then you had this great movement out of the industrialization, urbanization, where you have these workers' rights movements and children's rights movements, and the poor, competing with the rich for social class position, for example. Okay, your early sociologists, you have Comte and Martineau, they're the ones who first start talking about how do these larger social forces affect all of us, okay? And Durkheim furthers that by introducing functionalism and talking about how social structures structure your life, okay? Social structures like the economy structure your life. Social structures like religion structure your life, okay? He then talks about some great concepts like anime. What happens when people are not connected to society, not connected to groups? They experience this anime, this disconnect. People need groups. It's imperative for all of us. You have Max Weber introducing ideas like social class and culture and bureaucracies and economics, how they affect you. You have George Simmel talking about society being pattern interactions. The Chicago School talking about social activism, really getting out there and getting your hands dirty and working with the poor to make things better. Then you have W.B. Du Bois, the first African American to get a PhD from Harvard, talking about race and how looking at the American dream, even though he has a PhD for Harvard because he identifies as black, it's not for him because it's 100 years ago, and that's what society looked like then. Very depressing. Okay, so this is just some of the early thinkers that when we combine all of these ideas, we start to build on our sociological theories. Okay, so in sociology, we have the 3 basic theories plus a bunch of other ones that we're not going to delve into too much in this class, but we're going to talk about 3 big ones. So a theory is an explanation for social phenomena, for example, in this class. A perspective is an overall approach. So the overall perspectives, the 3 big ones we're going to cover are functionalism, conflict theory, and symbolic interactionism. Okay, you're going to need to read up on this a little bit because the first time you start to apply the theories, you're like, what? Does that make sense? Okay, so Durkheim, Parsons, and Merton are the first to really talking about functionalism. The idea of functionalism is this: society is structured by social institutions, such as the education system, government, politics, and the military, the family, religion, media. Okay, they all structure our life. Now, the way to think about society from a functionalist perspective, just think about the body. Okay, all these institutions serve a purpose. The education system serves a purpose to socialize, okay, and to prepare the next generation. The economy serves a purpose, a method of exchanging goods and services such as labor, okay? The military serves a purpose for protection and to make war. The government serves a purpose to organize our lives and make laws to make a stable society. Okay? So when you think about the body, the heart has a purpose. Okay? The liver has a purpose. Again, same thing with the education system. It's just like the heart. You need the education system. That's why it exists, right? So we have developed the education system to structure society for a purpose. Okay? So when you think about functionalism and you think about society, you're asking, what's the purpose of these macro institutions? Okay? But this goes further because it's also, what's the purpose of race? Okay? I want to get back into that in a second. Conflict theory, the best way to think about that is group versus group. It's one group competing with another group. It's rich versus poor, men versus women. We're all competing for power and to rise up the social class ladder, okay? Symbolic interactionism. This is the idea that we make society. Society doesn't just exist in a natural state. It's us interacting with each other, building society together. Okay? We're the ones who made the education system. If it doesn't work, we tear it down and build a new one. We're the ones who came up with democracy and the American style of government. If it doesn't work, tear it down, build a new one. If it works, but some things are kind of out of place, update it, okay? So now let's apply a concept like race to all these theories. Functionalism. What's the purpose of the institution of race? Okay? Again, Europeans during the age of colonialism wanted to dominate society, so they wanted to divide society into rich and poor, those who can and those who can't have. So what do all Europeans tend to have in common? The color of their skin. So one day Europeans got together and they were like, well, we all share light colored skin. Let's just all call ourselves white and we'll call everybody else non-white. And so begins race. The purpose of race being constructed by Europeans, because race is not universal, they made it so they could have a clearly defined lower class workforce. Okay? Conflict theory for race, again, is saying the elite, the Europeans, the upper class wanted to maintain their position in society, so they created race so they could subjugate an entire group of people into the lower class. So rich could then have less competition from the poor. So again, think about it. Europeans had a chance, think about the founding of America. Jefferson, Washington, they create this Bill of Rights, right? But what do? They exclude women and they exclude non-white. So the only people that could really compete in America until the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement were light-colored, light-skinned males. Any non-light-skinned males, which meant all women and all minorities, were not allowed to participate and get elite upper positions in society. Okay, and we'll get deeper into that with Jim Crow laws and all the other creative mechanisms by which European descendants have tried to restrict other people's access to the market. Okay, and then symbolic interactionism is this. We're the ones who made up race, guys. Race didn't exist 200-300 years ago. There's no such thing as white and black. Hispanic is like a 50-year-old word. I mean, Hispanic is not even a race, it's an ethnicity. White is not a race, it's an ethnicity that spans every continent from Russia, which is in Asia, to Europe, to North America, okay? It's an ethnicity. There's no such thing as like a pure race, okay? So we'll get into that in a little bit. But again, symbolic interactionism is we created race. We could undo race. Just stop calling yourself white. Stop calling yourself black. Stop thinking of yourself as different from somebody. Because a white person in the United States has this more biologically in common with anyone in Africa than they do their next door neighbor that's also white. And that's hard to hear, I know. But we'll get into that a little bit later when we get into race. And then postmodern theory is really focusing on social change, globalization, technology, social control, inequality, capitalism, all this awesome stuff we're going to talk about in this class, okay? So our research methods for studying sociology, we have quantitative methods, which is numbers, statistics. And then you have qualitative research, which is non-numbers, non-statistics, okay? In sociology, again, it's hard to have a controlled experiment because how do you really control society? And in order to really prove causation, you have to have a controlled experiment to do that. So in sociology, we're really focusing on correlation. Relationships between variables. Is there an association between race, sex, and how much money you make? And that's what I broke down earlier. Hispanic females make 20 cents less than a white woman, and a white woman makes 20 cents less than an average man. So what's the correlation? Race is associated with how much money you get paid. Sex slash genders or gender is also associated with how much money you make. That's sociology. So the research process in the social sciences, psychology, sociology, across the board. State the research problem. What's the research question? Do a literature review. Find out what other people have studied. What are they looking at? Where's the gaps in the literature? What do we need to study? What kind of stuff needs updated? What do we know nothing about? Then you state your hypothesis. Hypotheses. What do you expect to happen? Okay? Then you want to describe specifically what we're looking at. We're looking at variables such as independent variables and dependent variables. So again, in our analogy of race, sex, and money, the independent variables are race and sex, and the dependent variable is how much money you make. An independent variable causes or doesn't cause a change on the dependent variable, and a dependent variable is changed or isn't changed by the independent variable. So whenever I think about independent versus dependent, I think about a fist and a hand, okay? If I hit my hand and my fist moves, what's the independent variable? The independent variable is the fist. The hand moving is the dependent variable. Now, if I hit my fist and my hand doesn't move, the independent variable is still the hand, and the dependent variable is still the fist. However, if it doesn't move, there might not have been a change. That's the idea of independent and dependent variables. You guys will get a lot of that in your science classes, I'm sure. Then we model our research design. What kind of research study are we going to do? Are we going to use surveys? Are we going to do interviews? Are we going to go out and do field observations? Are we going to do some statistical analysis? Then we want to go out and collect and analyze the data. And then once we've analyzed the data, we want to draw conclusions and report findings and any generalizable findings that we might find, okay? So when it comes to data gathering, our research methods, our approach, our design, we can use surveys. Again, these are like questionnaires. You guys have all filled out surveys. Secondary analysis, going into the literature, looking at what other people have found and combine that information. Content analysis, going through and pulling out common themes and then putting all those common themes into common headings. So we can talk about common experiences, for example. You have field research, going out into the field and observing. For example, if you're interested in kindergarten students, you could have, observe kindergarten classes for the way they interact with each other, etc. Ethnography is then more going out and looking at culture, studying entire ways of life. And then we do have our experiments when possible. These controlled environments with an experimental and a control group, okay? And ethics always have to be considered when it comes to research. So the American Sociological Association, American Psychological Association, we all have these codes of ethics. They're guidelines for research and guidelines for the practice of the field, what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Objectivity and integrity is highly prized. We need to be objective, even though true objectivity is impossible. Nobody can get outside of their head. You don't want to be influenced by bias. And you need integrity in the science. You don't want to be fudging the numbers so that you can make the numbers, say what you want them to say, for example, okay? Always we want to protect participants from harm, okay? We always want to guarantee confidentiality and anonymity whenever possible. And if confidentiality is to be, questionable, we have to inform them of that before they begin the study. And then we always have to acknowledge research collaboration, anyone else who was involved in the research, okay? So that's the introduction to sociology week 1. Again, we're in sociology, we're studying society, we're studying groups of people. We're going to be looking through the lens of sociology, race, social class, religion, culture, and how does that affect our life. If you have any questions, please email me, and thank you so much.